Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Aerospace Research Collective. We left off last episode unlocking basic science tech and having just ventured into Kerbin's radiation belt, and today we're going to set our sights a little bit out further beyond. The first thing to do is head into Mission Control and check out what kind of contracts are available for us to try our hand at. The first one that caught my eye was this manned orbit contract to keep a Kerbal in orbit for 30 days, which I decided to pick up and try my hand at. While doing some mission planning, however, I hit a bit of a snag. Due to Kerbalism's stress mechanics, I need to have a pod that supports having a pressurized internal atmosphere in order for the lucky test subject, pilot, to be comfortable in space for 30 days. However, the only pressure-capable pod that we currently have unlocked is the Soyuz clone one-seat pod, and this pod doesn't have a reaction wheel. This means that once we're in space, we won't actually have any means of controlling the craft other than the gimbaling on the engine, which isn't very reliable and would put a strain on the already tight limitations of the vehicle assembly building and the space program's budget. The logical solution here would be to aim for the flight control tech, which costs 45 science points and would provide access to not only a dedicated reaction wheel, but also to fins with active control surfaces that would greatly increase the control authority for rockets that would otherwise be unwieldy. To that end, I started off by making a few modifications to the Orbiter Mark II rocket used last episode. I swapped out the Geiger counter for a thermometer and barometer, removed the materials study, and cut down to one mystery goo container. After that, the rocket could be launched directly into high space over Kerbin, which allowed the collection of mystery goo and thermometer science. After landing, I had Jeb get out and collect a bit more EVA science before going into the tracking station to recover him in the vehicle. After all that science, we have a grand total of 39.6 science, which is unfortunately just shy of what we need to unlock flight control. I don't have a whole lot of options here as far as science collection, so I reconfigured the orbiter again to include a material study, which we haven't collected yet for high space over Kerbin. After another flight very similar to the first, we pick up an additional 16 science, which pushes us high enough to unlock the tech we're after. At this point, I went to work designing an endurance orbiter using the parts I had just unlocked. Unfortunately, however, I had a very difficult time getting it to orbit and came to the conclusion that there was just not quite enough delta V to get the craft into a stable orbit. At this point, there are a few roadblocks in the way, each with their own solutions. First, we need a lot of these small pressurized tanks to run the hydrogen fuel cell, which is our only source of electrical power thus far. This could be solved by unlocking larger tanks through the space exploration tech, as well as the electrics tech, which also provides solar panels and larger batteries, which would circumvent the problem. However, Both of these techs cost 90 science points, which seems pretty out of reach at the moment. Upgrading the VAB would increase the limit on number of parts above 30, but this would be very expensive and require some grinding. The only real fund grinds available are tourism contracts, which would realistically only net about 20,000 funds in each mission if I took 2 tourists to orbit. I would have to conduct a lot of flights to raise the funds to upgrade the VAB. And third, I'm still relying on a lot of small fuel tanks. Unlocking the advanced rocketry tech would offer larger fuel tanks and a more efficient and lightweight vacuum engine. This tech only costs 45 science points, but I wasn't sure where to get them until I saw an interesting contract in Mission Control, a contract to fly by Minmus. We don't have the resources to send a Kerbal to Minmus just yet, but we just unlocked a dedicated reaction wheel that would solve the issue of our only probe core lacking any control authority. Also, with the Strategia mod, we can take the Minmus probes strategy to increase the funds gained from milestone rewards. And so I set out to build a probe capable of flying to Minmus. With the limited parts available, it was very difficult to find a configuration with about 7,000 meters per second of delta V to get to Minmus in JNSQ, but I eventually settled on this abomination of a design. It features a bulky upper stage with a fuel cell and science instruments alongside a powerful antenna. This stage is lifted by an intermediate stage with one BACC Thumper SRB. This stage also has a fixed antenna and a barometer, as there won't be much atmospheric science to do once this stage is depleted. The launch stage is comprised of 2 thumpers that are attached to a structural piece to provide the thrust required to heave the rest of the rocket above the soupy lower atmosphere. Once the vehicle was ready, I quickly time-warped to the launch window by enabling the patched Conics orbit view for a moment. I prepared a few MechJeb info panels and ended up piloting this craft using the Smart ASS manual surface mode by keeping the angle of attack slightly negative until we hit max dynamic pressure, and then keeping the angle of attack as close to neutral as possible while ensuring that the time until the apoapsis was consistently increasing. It wasn't the most efficient launch ever, but it was enough to put the probe in orbit with enough delta V to transfer to Minmus. A transfer to Minmus takes about 1,570 meters per second at delta V in JNSQ, which ended up being about a 40-second ejection burn. This was followed by an inclination correction of about 40 meters per second. Normally I would plan the inclination change all into the first burn, but I don't have the Space Center upgrades to see maneuvers on the nav ball, which is pretty much a necessity for making maneuvers that aren't only along one nav ball axis. My trajectory wasn't perfect, and I was concerned since my upper stage engine didn't have any ignitions left, but luckily I was able to squeeze out one more short burn to get the Minmus periapsis down to low space. As the probe crossed into space around Minmus, we get some notifications that we have completed our contract. The boosted milestone reward and contract reward give us a hefty sum of funds when all was said and done. As the probe coasts by and skirted past Minmus' surface, it collected and transmitted a series of experiments including temperature scans, radiation scans, telemetry reports, and the LITE. With the probe flying away from its encounter with Kerbin's lesser moon, its mission has come to a close. We can head back into the Research and Development Center and unlock our advanced rocketry tech, which will greatly expand the capabilities of the space program's rockets, especially in the vacuum of space, where we will have to be expending more and more Delta V with each passing mission and milestone. Although the space program may not have achieved what it first set out to do today, our successful foray into the space around our first new celestial body has laid the groundwork for what we seek to do next. Thanks for watching. Remember to like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you want to see more, and I hope to have you again next time.